How am I going to be able to say to somebody, you know what, I don't care what the barriers are, I'm going to remove all of that. I just want you in the room. And I was able to do that. And I've seen other organizations that are putting that emphasis there. But I also, to your point, don't see a lot.
Hello, futuras cash libres. Welcome back to the show. Today, I want to invite you to have maybe your cafecito ready if you can, because I want to have a conversation on all things leadership and also just bring this amazing mujer who I admire. And I'm so happy that you're here with us today, Michelle. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So, to kick off the call, I want to ask you, what was your relationship with money growing up? And yeah, just share a little bit about your upbringings.
Really interesting experience growing up with money because back then I think you could still use the term like lower middle class. I think there was kind of still a solid place for that back in the day. Grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment, sharing a bedroom with my sister. So I have a really interesting relationship with money growing up. It was still kind of square back in the day when lower middle class was still, I think, kind of a thing. So didn't really grow up with a lot, but always had enough. But the interesting relationship I had to money was that my grandparents on my mother's side were farm workers, and we still very much were connected to that farm worker community. So would go in the evenings with my mom when she would teach English to farm workers and see folks living in farm camps. But then during the day, the district that I grew up in used to have a program where if you were titled gifted, the GATE program, they actually would bus you to special schools. And you can guess, a lot of the people I was in school with were wealthy white kids. And so I had these huge dichotomies of like really wealthy people, all the lawyers, doctors in towns. I would go to their house to visit, and it was like these massive homes, evenings at these farm worker camps, and then like living in our 2-bedroom apartment. So I always had enough, but I think I had these extremes of being able to be grateful, but then also like seeing like, whoa, we don't have anything like that. And so I'm grateful for that because I find comfort in being able to very much still be with everyday people and not really having to struggle in any way with not understanding like where I came from, but then also seeing aspirational wealth and degrees and all these things that then also kind of help me to see like there's so much more than what I.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Do you think that experience of aspirational degrees, as you call it, was one of the catalysts for you to say, I want to become a doctor?
That journey was such a long one. So, my dad came here from Venezuela and he was following a friend who actually came here to study at a university. And so my dad never, went to college and got a BA or anything like that, but he knew about it. He knew it was important. And so we talked about it all the time. It was always like, you need to study hard because you're going to go to college, very much a first gen experience. So I always knew I needed to get a BA. That was kind of a set thing. But everything after that kind of eventually evolved little by little. So getting a master's was because I was the first in my family to get a BA, might as well be the first to get a master's. It just so happened to come with the program that I did because I was in education at the time, came with a admin credential, which meant that I could then be an administrator. Did not plan on using it. But I had these Latina leaders who were like, hey, I heard you got this degree. I need to hire someone. Would you be interested in coming and working with me? And so that kind of started my journey into educational leadership. And back then, I had aspirations to be a superintendent. And oftentimes, to be a superintendent, they all have doctorates. So the doctorate journey was really a means to superintendency, which ended up not happening for various reasons. But I will say that I'm still grateful for it because that experience introduced me to so many people. It really helped me. I wouldn't have known it at the time, but so much of the research I did, it was on the systemic devaluation of Latino students in schools. I understand so deeply how a lot of what folks struggle with, even in leadership now, starts with what they were not taught or devalued in them when they were in the education system. So long journey for it to help me with the business I have now, but it was really more a career thing that ended up going in a whole different direction.
And I always say it takes a leader to also want to jump into entrepreneurship, especially in your case, someone that was part of the education system. So, Michelle, when did you make the leap into entrepreneurship? And what was the catalyst for you to say, I'm going to go do things on my own?
I will say that now when I look back and I reflect, there was an entrepreneurial spirit all along. And I will say also, like thinking about my dad again, I remember like my dad's never opened a business, but my dad used to always sit at the table and I, literally like the whole back of the envelope kind of thing. Like he would be scribbling out these ideas and things he wanted to do. Like he used to talk about making a portable car washing business, like way back before that was like really a thing. And he was always dreaming of these things, but then like, life happens. He worked nights and he was tired and there was all this other stuff happening that he never built it. So I think that was somewhere implanted in my brain. And then if I look back, I mean, I was a high school principal. A lot of that is very entrepreneurial. You're trying to create partnerships, you're bringing in resources, you are managing lots of people and lots of initiatives and things that are happening. And so now I'm kind of like, oh, that was already there. Then when I pivoted to the nonprofit world, I was the first executive director of a nonprofit in Oakland. And so it was like building the team from scratch, raising money, partnerships, all that stuff again. And I'm like, I think the reason I succeeded in the roles that I had in the past in leadership was because they were always very entrepreneurial, kind of the new, you get to do brand new things space. I think if I would have done leadership in a space where it was more me kind of fitting into a role that existed forever and having to do what everybody else did, I don't think I would have been as successful. So I think there was always this knowing within me, like, I just kind of want to build something. I want to do my own thing. And then eventually it evolved into that in 2020, like so many other people during the pandemic.
I love your story because it just shows the growth that you've had since I started connecting with you, and so I really appreciate your expertise on not just like your leadership, but also watching you lead, which I feel like a lot of people teach leadership from a place of this is what I learned from a book, but with you is like you bring your live experiences, and I think that that's what makes your work so powerful. Now, I want to ask you about the struggles that you see or the gaps that you see with mujeres working 9 to 5. Those mujeres that are ready to jump into maybe a leadership, but there's something holding you back. What are the patterns that you've seen working with mujeres?
So the benefit of, and I appreciate you calling that out because I think that really is the balance I bring to this space, is that I do have this academic background. I'm fascinated by the research and the books and all the things, but like, how do we actually make that work for people? So during my time in the nonprofit world, we used to do 360s with folks. So we ran a leadership development program. When folks came in, they got a 360. When they finished, we got a post 360. And every single cohort, every single time I would review the data, it was almost exactly the same. The top things that people were being seen for were mission driven, care about students, working really hard. And the lower areas that they were usually scored the lowest in were all the executive skills, negotiating, strategy, managing people. So what was happening over and over again and it was Black and brown folks, is we are known for being hard workers. We're known for caring so deeply about the work that we do. But then nobody's really mentoring and supporting us to actually learn the technical things that are going to get us into the C suite if that's what we want. So we keep working really, really hard, thinking somebody's going to see me, somebody is going to like notice me. And in reality, you actually haven't managed anybody, and that's going to hold you back. Or you've never actually sat in or been a part of a strategic planning team. So that's going to be something that you're always going to need to not be able to check the box for. So what I see is a lot of people who care deeply, and I want to help folks on the journey to start to realize, like, how do I take that? And yes, that's my purpose, but I also need to figure out how to marry that with the realities of what leadership is. So I feel more confident actually applying for the job. So I actually can show up at the interview and say, I know how to do all these things that are going to help this organization to be successful. I think a lot of us get held back because we're just waiting, or we keep reviewing the job descriptions and not seeing that we match it. And we're kind of being held back from people not really mentoring us on the things that are the most important to be able to get into C-suite level roles.
You brought my favorite subject other than money, which is the C suite. There is a gap,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hurtful to me as someone who also works with Latinas that have, professional career. But I want to talk about the barriers now because where I live, and maybe you can tell me how things are in California, where I live, I see these different programs that are tailored towards helping individuals become part of a leadership program. But there is this barrier, not just of diversity, but also the barrier of if you want to be part of this leadership program, you have to pay $15,000 or your employer has to sponsor you. Do you see the same gaps in California?
Completely. I mean, even our program, people, I mean, we know in no way charged what the cost of the program was, which is where I had to raise money. But even then, it was like, can you talk to your employer about this? Can you get them to sponsor something? Because somehow, the program has to be funded. But at the end of the day, I will tell you, even though our program was specifically for Black and brown folks, I wouldn't get Latinas. But as a Latina myself and somebody who cared deeply about that, every time we would get a slew of applications, if I went through them and didn't see any Latinas, I'd be like, we're not moving forward until we can put some Latinas in this pool. And I would be calling everybody I knew, going out, trying to do what we could to recruit additional people because it mattered deeply to me. But I can see how so many people could get lost in other organizations when we don't know, we don't apply. And unless there's somebody sitting in that room who says, no, we have to have Latinas in this pool, they aren't going out and like looking for us and bringing us in and specifically recruiting to make sure we get in the room. That's where it matters that there's more of us in those seats to then actually go putting that voice in the room to say, no, we're not moving forward until we get people here. And also figuring out, how am I going to create the scholarships? How am I going to be able to say to somebody, you know what, I don't care what the barriers are. I'm going to remove all of that. I just want you in the room. And I was able to do that. And I've seen other organizations that are putting that emphasis there. But I also, to your point, don't see a lot. So I think that it's really on us who've actually figured these out. How do we spread the word? How do we tell more people that they even exist? And then how to even get in the room and do sponsorships and whatever it takes to happen. When I started running my first group coaching program, I actually had, God bless them, I had some friends who reached out and said, can I sponsor someone to be in your program? Because I don't necessarily need to go through this like purpose journey to figure out my career, but if I can sponsor somebody else, please let me. Or I'd have people reach out to me and say, I have this woman who works with me. I think this would be great for her. I would love to pay if she decides she wants to go through the process. That's what we need. We need Latinas making it into these seats who are now looking back and figuring out, how do I get more in here, which unfortunately doesn't always happen. But that's really how we keep getting more people in and removing the barriers for them.
I love that your friends were like, I'm going to redirect my dollars back to Michelle because she knows what she's doing and I'm happy to do it. And I think that's such a beautiful example of also having the wealth to give it to people. And I mean, I see these all the time in our community. There's so much emphasis on GoFundings for, funeral and things like that when life happens. But I think that we also need to work on something at the top where Latinas have access to the next step. And in fact, talking about, how we can do things, I ended up talking to a local organization and say, hey, your organization is supporting these mujeres when they're in high school and to get into college, but what happens after that? So I was able to kind of just make them think a little bit different. Like, we need to be able to put them in the rooms with the right opportunities. And so I'm a member of this club, by the way. And so they finally said, like, oh, well, tell us more, right? Because sometimes it's not always about us doing the hard work. It's actually stepping into the leadership mindset of, how can I use my voice to advocate for my community, which you do such a beautiful, beautiful job on that. Now, I want to ask you, when someone waits for this leadership opportunity and they're like, I'm just going to keep doing this because someone will notice me, in your opinion, what do you think is the financial waiting for that opportunity?
I mean, there's the financial cost, and I think there's just the emotional cost of that. Like, how many mujeres do we know who are just not happy, right? And not happy because they are rolling themselves to this job every day that offers security. I mean, I talk to women all the time who are kind of like, well, but it's a sure thing. And it's like, we're seeing right now, it's not necessarily just because you've been there forever doesn't mean the organization has the same loyalty to you that you have to them. And so I think that it's the financial cost of not getting promoted and not being able to negotiate yourself into higher roles. Especially most of the folks I coach are in the education and nonprofit space. There haven't even been getting COLAs the last few years with everything that's been happening. So they're literally staying at the exact same salary from year to year without any sort of even just a 3% bump, let alone a 10 or higher bump to like actually match the level of expertise that they're growing into. But then it also just weighs on them heavily on their soul and emotionally, that then when there is a moment when they're like, you know what, I think it is time to start looking, they're now feeling exhausted. They're feeling overwhelmed. They don't even know where to start because they've kind of lost themselves in this journey. And so I feel like there is the financial cost, but then it also holds them back when they finally are like, okay, I'm ready to take the step. There's just so much weighing on them that then they need a bunch of help to actually start putting themselves out there and even knowing what they would look for next.
I love this. If you could give someone who is in that situation right now, what are some three actionable steps that you say, if you do this, this, and this, you're off to a great start?
You just teed me up there. So I don't run it anymore, but I used to run my group coaching program, Chingona Sabbatical. Something else is on the mix, but I think I'm switching to membership model now. But the frame was actually essentially three things. And I walk one-on-one clients through this now. Is the first one is passions. So what actually energizes you? What are the things that are happening on the days when you're like, I don't even want to leave work. I'm so excited. I'm jazzed to be here. And what are happening on the days when you're like, I don't even want to get out of bed. Is it 5 o'clock yet? Like, you just don't even want to be there. That is the first signal for where you should be putting more of your time and your attention. Next is your strengths. What are you great at? We spend so much time in our professional lives figuring out our weaknesses as opposed to being able to just name, this is the thing that I'm really great at, and actually advocating for yourself to be able to do more of what you're great at. And if I do what I'm great at, Lucy gets to do what she's great at, and my other colleague does too, then we're each getting to fully be authentically ourselves. And together we collectively make the whole thing work, right? And then, so I think passions plus strengths is going to help you figure out your purpose. And then when you have clarity of your values, then that's going to accelerate you to live into purpose driven living, purpose driven leadership, whatever it is the thing you're focusing on. So passions, strengths, figuring out your core values start to give you a framework for building out the next thing. So what are you energized about? What are you great at? And then what are your core values that are going to kind of serve as your bumpers, so to speak, for your boundaries in the way that you actually navigate the spaces and the people that you're with.
Michelle, did you had clarity on your values when you started like your corporate career, or does that come with age? Because a lot of people are like, I don't even know how to figure out this shit. Like, I don't know what my values are. Like, when does someone get clear on those values? What was your experience like?
I think with all of these things, we need to be open to them being ever evolving. Sometimes we get so stuck on like, I have to know this thing and it's going to be the permanent thing forever. And for me, honestly, it kicked off at a dinner. I was at a dinner. This was like many years ago, like over a decade ago. I was sitting at a dinner and somebody at the dinner mentioned something about how she was working on figuring out her values. And I think I said something like, oh, I kind of was dismissive, I think, of what she was saying. And then she was just like, well, name yours. And I was like, huh. And then I was just like, travel, family, quién sabe qué más, right? And I just like listed some stuff off. And then she was just like, well, then those are your values. And so I was like, huh. And I've sat with them. And over the years, and of course, when you're going through like coaching certification and things like that, you continue having conversations around values. And what I have found is that my core values have not shifted, but I get more specific about them. So, like, for example, with travel, it's not really about travel, it's about adventure. Because even when I'm not in another country, there's just something about trying new things and asking questions and exploring that I'm really into. Adventure is really a core value. It's not just about family. I have a lot of non-blood related family, which is part of why I ended up moving to LA. It's really about community. So it's more so that I think I've kind of given myself permission to kind of put something out there first and then just kind of keep playing with the language and kind of asking myself, what does this mean? What does this look like? Until eventually I got to a place where I would be like, oh yeah, these are my 5 core values. And they don't change, but my relationship to them and my understanding of what they actually mean in my life is the thing that slightly shifts all the time. So can you just like name something to get yourself started? And then maybe they're on a post-it over here on the wall or somewhere where you can just regularly look at them and be in relationship with them. And then eventually like see if you can get more clarity on what that actually means for living them in your life.
Me encanta. Now, I have two final questions for you. The first one is a yes or no question, or excuse me, yes or no answer. And then the second one is your definition of wealth. Okay. So, number one, have you been able to generate multiple 6 figures with your values?
Yes.
And what is your definition of wealth?
I would say agency. When I think about the times I've done a lot of pivots in my life, from living in Sacramento to the Bay Area to now living in LA, from going from K-12 education to nonprofit world to entrepreneurship and actually taking a 6-month sabbatical in there, getting divorced. I've taken lots of pivots in my life, and all of them have been this complete agency to do whatever I want because I had wealth. And I don't use the term risky when I describe myself, but I've had multiple people say like, oh, you're such a risk taker. And I'm like, I don't think it's so, like, outwardly, I totally get that. I look like a risk taker. But actually, on the back end, I'm a very calculated risk taker. And the first thing I'm always analyzing in my decision making is the money. Okay, what does it look like to not work for 6 months? What does it look like to walk away from my job and start a business? What does it look like to blah, blah, blah? And it always starts with me finding, honestly, safety, with being able to know these are all the ways I'm going to be able to navigate the situation because of the wealth that I have, the money that's available to me. So it's given me complete agency in my life in so many areas. And I'm grateful for that. And that's why I continue to build it, because I want to have agency to keep taking pivots anytime that's where life takes me.
Yeah, anytime you want, any day of the week, any month. And I love this so much for you. And no wonder you named your program, Chingona, because it was like you truly are in many ways. My favorite way of how you show up for a community is owning your energy and just like how you take yourself into rooms, because I've seen you. I really love that about you. You don't tone it down. You don't like do all these things to look different. It's like, no, I'm going to show up as I am. So, for those mujeres that are interested in learning more about Michelle's program, please follow her on her website, michelleseijas.com. And of course, always check the links in the show notes. If you found this interview helpful, please give us a review and also follow Michelle, because I'm telling you, it has been an honor just being in rooms with her multiple times. And she truly embodies what it means to be a true leader in our community. Michelle, thank you so much for coming to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.